News Talk is online. News Talk Online, a production of Paltalk.com, syndicated by CRN Digital Talk Radio, and posted all over the place. Please go to reportergary.com early and often, like voting in Chicago, for stories that you may or may not see, hear, or read in the mainstream media. That's where the Paltalk News Network website resides. Yes, for those of you watching me on cam, I've got my snowman mug. I'm drinking hot chocolate in solidarity with my brothers and sisters in the Midwest who have 2 feet of snow heading their way, something that will be all over tomorrow, I am sure. Victoria Jones, reporter extraordinaire at the Talk Radio News Service, our Washington Bureau up at the White House, joins us again here on News Talk Online on the Paltalk News Network. 2 major stories, believe it or not, one that actually supplants for a moment Egypt, although tomorrow Egypt's going to be huge again because they're calling for that million-man march in Cairo. But a Florida judge, a federal judge in Florida, has struck down at least a portion of the President Obama's / Democrats' health reform bill that was passed last year by the Congress. Victoria, welcome to the show, and tell us about that, if you would, please.
Yeah, the judge, the federal judge, Roger Vinson, a Reagan appointee, has actually ruled the entire health care overhaul is unconstitutional, the whole thing. But he said he'll allow it to remain in effect while the Obama administration appeals his ruling. It could take a couple of years. But he did say that the whole thing should fall if the appellate courts join him in invalidating the insurance requirement. What he says is that it was unconstitutional for Congress to enact a health care law that requires Americans to obtain commercial insurance, that the insurance requirement exceeds the regulatory powers granted to Congress under the Commerce Clause of the Constitution. And he says the act, like a defectively designed watch, needs to be redesigned and reconstructed by the watchmaker. He says if Congress can penalize a passive individual for failing to engage in commerce, the enumeration of powers in the Constitution would have been in vain. There was one silver lining for the Obama administration, which was that he rejected a second claim, which is that the new law violates state sovereignty by requiring states to pay for a fractional share of a Medicaid expansion scheduled for 2014. And he's the first judge to look at that. And the contention is that states are being illegally commandeered by the federal government. And he said, no, you know, you always have the option to withdraw from Medicaid. So that one didn't work.
I'm not a legal scholar by any stretch of the imagination, and I know you're not, but you're covering this. So can you put into perspective how a judge can so broadly kill a bill, a law of this magnitude with so many components based on one part of it? I mean, why did he not just strike down the portion that requires everybody to have health insurance and leave the rest of it in place?
Oh, well, here we get into the legal weeds, and we get a bit above my pay grade, but the reason is the provision is, he says the provision, basically the whole thing, the whole law hangs on the individual mandate. If you don't have the individual mandate, the whole health care law doesn't work. And so he declared the whole thing unconstitutional. In other words, the law's requirement is that nearly all Americans purchase health insurance. And the idea behind that is that we all need to buy into a pool in order for it to be fair and for prices to be reasonable. And the other thing is the law doesn't have what's called a severability clause, which is a common legal phrase that prevents courts from striking down a whole law because one piece has been found to be illegal. It doesn't have one. And he said because the individual mandate is unconstitutional and not severable, the entire act must be declared void. This has been a difficult decision to reach, and I'm aware that it will have indeterminable implications. And the thing is, it probably wasn't supposed to be written this way. The Senate legislation was never expected to be final. What happened was when Senator Scott Brown was elected in January last year, Democrats were forced to let the legislation pass the House with only the alterations that were allowed in the technical reconciliation process. Nothing else.
I see. Well, the thing is, that means that if this stands, and now there's going to be, as you said, potentially a protracted legal battle over it, if in fact it ultimately is determined, maybe even by the United States Supreme Court, that the law is null and void, we start at square one again. And actually there may be some proponents of health care who are celebrating this as a victory as well, because they didn't think that the bill went far enough. They wanted a single payer system funded by the United States government entirely. And maybe they'll get it now, who knows?
Well, I think they may have to wake up and recognize that there's been a major shift in Congress, and it's unlikely that they're going to see a big shift back in the next Congress to where they're going to have a huge liberal Congress that would enact a single-payer system with a huge liberal president who's going to sign it.
Oh boy, I just got slapped. I just got slapped awake by Victoria Jones there. Victoria, let's go to Egypt, because we would be remiss if we didn't concentrate a little bit on that. The Obama administration has made some very nuanced but obvious changes in its public statements with regard to the events in Egypt. We had last week the Vice President of the United States declaring that Hosni Mubarak is not a dictator and suggesting that he would remain in office, and then extraordinarily on 5 television cable, well, not all cable, but 5 television networks, Sunday morning, we watched Hillary Clinton stick to a script which said, basically, we're not concerned about the outcome in Egypt. We're leaving those aspirations in the hands of the Egyptian people. We just are imploring the authorities to use restraint. That's a marked difference.
Yes, she was saying that, but she did talk about a transition, and she talked about democracy, and she talked about it being immediately. She said it needs to be an orderly, peaceful transition to real democracy, not faux democracy like we saw in Iran 2 years ago. And she said immediately, and that was a big shift. So you do get the impression that they're trying to stay ahead of the game, but it's very difficult when things are changing every few minutes.
Yes,
I think
they are changing.
Robert Gibbs today would not come out in favor of regime change. What he did say, I mean, he said the same sort of things that she said. He said, we're calling for a change in the way that country works. That was the plainest way that he said it.
Well, you know what? It's too bad he didn't say that, she didn't say that, and the president didn't say that long ago, and the same for the previous administration, in my opinion. Victoria Jones, thanks for joining us. Great reporting as always from the Talk Radio News Service in Washington, D.C. on News Talk Online on the Paltalk News Network.
Thank you.
Thank you.